Alright folks, people for economic profit, I think that was a Freudian slip. Yeah. It's always difficult doing talks because you're never sure where people are in the room, or if people are in financial difficulty, or what they know about banking, or if there's ex-bankers here wanting to know what I know about banking. So I'll brush through some subjects quickly, and if there's something then that you want to talk about afterwards that we went through too quickly or whatever like that, we can talk about it. So I'll talk about first about the trouble we're in Ireland and maybe how we got here. Last year I met up with a German Jewish gay guy who was a banker. He'd everything going for him, right? And he came over from Germany. He was headhunted by a bank called UniCredit. I don't know if anyone ever heard of him. Jonathan Sugarman. Anybody ever heard of Jonathan Sugarman? No? Okay. And because he came from Germany, he was used to banking laws being obeyed, and things being done right, and T's being crossed, and I's being dotted, and just things working in general the way they were supposed to work. And when he came to Ireland, he couldn't believe what he saw in the Irish Financial Service Centre in Dublin. He was the risk manager for the 5th largest bank in Europe at the time, which was UniCredit. And when they were breaking laws in Ireland, he was appalled by this, you know, because we had laws in Ireland that said, you know, you must not exceed this quota here, you know, in your risk management. It was a liquidity law, and it was about keeping the banks liquid. And just in layman terms, that means keeping stock or money on the shelf. That's really what it means. And so when he came here, he realised everybody was breaking the law by huge amounts, and it was just a sort of feckless attitude that we had. And he just couldn't believe it. The guy actually had a breakdown and ended up in St. John of God's, and he was on medication and that, because as he was following procedure and reporting to his boss, who is now promoted onto the board of Bank of Ireland, by the way, but this guy that he was reporting the serious break of law. Now when I say serious, these laws carried 5 years imprisonment, so they were a very serious law, and they were done by the financial regulator. And I'll play the video and you'll get some sense of what was going on. This was a program that went out in Australia, and most people have not seen it in this country. So we've just, I hope it starts playing.
So much of what happens on Wall Street is felt across the globe. Investors take their lead from this financial hub. Now people angry about banks and bankers are doing the same.
Occupy Wall Street under occupation. People arriving from everywhere.
The Occupy movement has spread to London, to Rome, and here to downtown Dublin.
We have probably in the region of 60 to 70 people who are sleeping here and hundreds of people who are coming by every day.
Jonathan Sugarman isn't the kind of person you expect to meet at a rally against economic inequality.
Hey, well done everybody.
After all, he was a big city banker, the very breed of 21st century capitalist who's brought thousands of people onto the streets all over the world.
The banks have all been nationalised because they ran out of money.
But this insider is now as appalled as anyone here about a system that's making the poor pay for the mistakes of the rich.
You have hospital wards shutting down, you have schools shutting down, you have public services that are now being curtailed because there's no money. The money's gone to the banks. Your money, my money, everyone's money has gone to the banks. What we need is for the regulation that exists to be enforced.
Jonathan Sugarman has never spoken publicly about his experiences until now. In 2007, he became a very senior executive at UniCredit, Italy's biggest bank, one of the top 5 banks in Europe. He was the head of risk management in Ireland.
As a bank, we have a license to operate as a bank, which is very much like a driving license. It says this is the speed you can go, this is what you can do, and you have to operate within these limits. And it was my job to make sure that that was done every day.
Jonathan Sugarman monitored the back office, the people responsible for checking the trades and the traders out front. He soon realised the numbers weren't adding up. He suspected his bank was breaching strict rules over how much cash and assets it's required to hold in reserve.
And I insisted that we notified the regulator immediately, which is precisely what we are required under the terms of our licence and under Irish law to do.
How certain are you that UniCredit broke the law while you were there?
100% certain. And to use the Irish expression, to be sure, that is why I brought in this London-based IT company, which had a very good reputation in Dublin, and the result was pretty horrific, because whereas the breach that I had reported to the regulator was a breach of 20%, whereas the permissible deviation was 1%, they rang me up one evening, soon after they tied into our systems, linked into our systems, and said, your breach is actually 40%.
When he raised the alarm with his chief executive, the response was dismissive. It was a systems error. The risk manager was instructed to continue approving the deals. Jonathan Sugarman was in the thick of a reckless banking culture that was on a collision course with disaster.
Well, on the days that the system threw up these figures that I was told were incorrect, we would sign to say, oh, this is a system error and we're confident that everything's all right, and just carry on as we did before, never notified anyone. So when you think of the fact that when Nick Leeson brought down Barings Bank, it collapsed over £800 million, I was signing over 5 billion every day that we didn't have.
Understanding the dictionary definition of the word and the fact that I spent 4.5 years in prison, I am a criminal. I always knew what I was doing was wrong. Did I think it was criminal from inception? Absolutely not.
It's been 16 years since Nick Leeson single-handedly brought down Britain's oldest bank, Barings.
Fight for 1,000! Fight for 1,000! Come on!
It was such a spectacular, audacious, outrageous act of financial skullduggery, Hollywood made a movie about it.
I mean, success was the thing that I always wanted. And you know, conversely, my biggest fear was the fear of failure. And the fear of failure was probably the one thing that I couldn't countenance. So putting my hand up and saying, look, there's this error that I should have closed yesterday, but I ran it into another day and therefore made the problem even worse, was the thing that I couldn't do.
When he came to Ireland, he used to have luncheon down in the IFSC, and he used to speak to other risk managers down there. And they all told him he was crazy to report anything. Sure, it's the Wild West of banking, as the New York Times said. And you can see like 800 million now seems like pittance. I mean, I hear figures today that we never learned in school, gazillions and trillions, and I don't even understand them. I couldn't tell you many zeros on some of them. But this guy was doing 5 billion a day illegally that he didn't have. That was one bank. Every day he was doing that. And they tell you then it's our fault because we maybe got an extra bedroom on the house or something like that. And maybe it was our fault, maybe we were all to blame. But the huge blame lies with the bank. Now the way I look at it is, the Irish people have bailed out the banks, and we still have people getting dragged out of their homes by sheriffs and the courts in this country. That to me is a shame and has to be addressed. And it's not that none of us want to pay our mortgage. We want the ability to pay our mortgage. When we got our mortgages or our loans, they went through the figures and it was agreed that we could pay and we had the ability to pay. But then they stripped the money of cash by doing this illegal activity and then bailed them out. And it leaves us in a position where most of us can't pay our bills. And that's not our fault. I mean, I heard a report there the other day, 1 in 5 children in this country go to bed hungry. I mean, that's not acceptable. And while I don't normally talk on individual cases, I see that guy being evicted from his house today. I don't know his circumstances. He may have been well off at one stage. But there's just something very wrong to look at a 71-year-old man getting dragged out of his house. I haven't seen any bankers being dragged out of their homes. And the day I see that, maybe I'll sleep a little better. But I'm not after revenge. I think if we pay back the money to the banks, then they're paid back, right? I mean, that's how I see it. We can't always be the victims here in Ireland. I mean, everybody else around the world has seen these films. They don't show them on Irish television for a very good reason. So then you come to the mortgages. And I don't know if people know about securitization or heard of securitization. It's a modern practice in banks. Basically, in a nutshell, they get a load of mortgages and they sell them on the stock exchange. And so the banks have then got paid for the mortgage. They also take out insurance for someone who defaults on their mortgage. And they get paid that way as well. And then they go and repossess your house if you can't pay. So they get paid 3 or 4 times for a mortgage. And when you go in to collect, your draft, when you actually applied for your mortgage, I don't know if most of you know that the money actually didn't exist. It's created on a signature. It's called fractional banking reserve. Something you should Google. It's too long to go into tonight, but it's just, if you take notes of these things, or if you want to talk afterwards about some of the stuff, you should take note of some of these things. So that's where we're at. Now, I don't know if anybody's seen the prospectus document, but basically this is say like the what would be in a mortgage pool that they trade on the stock exchange. I just happen to have one here to hand from AIB. There's 20 billion worth of mortgages in that are trading on the stock exchange. And yet every time we go to court with someone who can't pay their mortgage, and we say to the bank, "Did you securitize the loan?" They say, "No, we didn't securitize this loan." We do securitize loans because they know they can't say they don't because we have the evidence. But they say we didn't securitize your loan. So I don't know what loans they're securitizing. But the courts are stymied when it comes to this sort of thing as well. They have no help for the people. I'm going to get 2 guys to explain exactly how the currency works. Because you know the way, if somebody says to you, "Well, how much are we bailing out the banks for?" Does anybody know? Does anybody know the exact amount how much we're bailing out the banks? No? Does anybody know how much we owe Spain? Or Spain owe us? Or Greece? Or any of these people? Nobody knows. You know, we released a list of bondholders on the stock exchange. You know, the ones we're bailing out from Anglo. We released that list on Vincent Brown. We gave it to a TD and she was on it and we asked would he read them out because we knew he had the balls to do it. There's no point giving it to Pat Kenny, right? So we gave it to Vincent. And the politician said that when she gave it to Vincent, he said, I'm going to read out, I don't know if any of you have seen it, unfortunately we have an internet connection here, we normally play it, it's a bit of fun. But the funny thing was, when he took it, he said, I'm going to read these out after the break. See? And it cuts to an ad. And the TV said to me that the minute the ads come on, about 3 floor managers ran on to Vince and said, you're not to read out that list. And he goes, okay, he puts it aside. And of course, the minute he comes back in, he goes, now where's that list? And he starts reading it out. And he starts off, Aberdeen Asset Management, so-and-so Asset Management, Swiss Asset Management, and he keeps going on. And then he goes, Rothschild's Asset Management. And then he goes, and Goldman Sachs, you know what I mean. You see? And Vincent is a good guy. I know you've probably all seen the video clip where he questioned the Troika. it's really interesting. But the important thing about this list of bondholders and why we wanted it released is that in 2008, when the proverbial hit the fan in this country, our government spent, we don't know how much obviously, because nothing is open and transparent in this country anyway, right? But we know they spent an awful lot of money to an advisory team to come over and advise Ireland on the best thing to do. And the advice we got was to pay back bondholders. Guess who was on the advisory group? Goldman Sachs and Rothschilds. Isn't that very interesting? Now you know why Enda Kenny was saying he didn't know who was on the list. And then you can see when he said to the minister, do you want to give a copy of that so Enda can see it? And he said, it's no laughing matter. And Vincent said, you're right, it's no laughing matter. You treat the Irish people like ticks because you're saying you don't know who owns, who the bondholders are. And so like my attitude to that was, if you don't know who they are, stop paying. And whoever shows up at the gates of Dáil Éireann and demands a few bob, well, sure, you owe them the money, pay them. But I mean, so the nonsense, and what really annoys me is they treat us like ticks. You know, this is really annoying. I mean, I don't mind if they just do the lying shit and all that sort of stuff. Please, treat us that we have a little bit of sense. You know, I mean, this is what I hate. So, the two guys are going to explain the intricacies of who owes what in Europe. And this will give you some sense of exactly what's going on.
Your name is Roger, yes?
Roger.
Ah, that's your name.
Roger.
Good. And what do you do, Roger?
I'm a financial consultant.
Ah, financial consultant, eh?
Roger,
yeah,
yes.
Terrific. And Roger, how's business at the moment?
Not bad, thank you. Been a bit quiet lately.
How do you mean lately?
Since the war, been a bit quiet.
Fair enough. OK, Roger, your special subject tonight is the economies of the European community. Your time starts now. Best of luck.
Thank you.
How much does Greece owe, Roger?
$367 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Mostly to the other European economies.
Correct. How much does Ireland owe?
$865 billion.
Correct. And who do they owe it to?
Other European economies, mostly.
Correct. How much do Spain and Italy owe?
$1 trillion each.
Correct. Who to?
Mainly France, Britain and Germany.
Correct. And how are Germany, France and Britain going, Roger?
Well, they're struggling a bit, aren't they?
Correct. Why?
Because they've lent all these vast amounts of money to other European economies that can't possibly pay them back.
Correct. So what are they going to do?
They're going to have to bail them out.
Correct. Where are they getting the money to do that, Roger?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
How much does Portugal owe?
Hang on a minute. What was the answer to that earlier question?
Just keep answering the questions, Roger. Where is Portugal going to get the money it owes to Germany if Germany can't get back the money that it lent to Italy?
Just a minute. What was the answer to the previous question? The question was, how can broke economies lend money to other broke economies who haven't got any money because they can't pay back the money the broke economy lent to the other broke economy and shouldn't have lent it to them in the first place because the broke economy can't pay it back?
You're wasting very valuable time, Roger. How much money does Spain owe to Italy?
$41 billion, but where are they going to get it?
Correct. What does Italy owe to Spain?
$27 billion, but they haven't got it. They're broke.
Correct. How can they pay each other if neither of them has any money?
They're going to get a bailout, aren't they?
Correct. And where's the money coming from for the bailout?
That's what I'm asking you.
Correct. Why are people selling the European currency and buying the US dollar?
Because the US economy is so much stronger than the European economy.
Correct. Why is that, Roger?
Because it's owned by China.
Correct. And very well done. And after that round, you've lost $1 million.
I've lost $1 million. I thought you said well done.
Yes, well done. You've only lost $1 million. That's an extraordinary performance,
I've
Roger.
only lost $1 million.
Very well done.
And that's quite good, is it?
Oh, it's excellent.
Sell everything immediately. Quickly.
I don't know if that's real or not, because the trouble is none of us know. What I do know is these are two Australian guys, and they might be more well up than we are, because these get these programs that air in Australia that we don't get here, and yet they directly affect us. So it's a bit worrying when you see this, because they seem to be more clued in than our government, and I really mean that. I'm not anti-government and I'm not anti-bank. I'm just anti this corruption mess and feeding bullshit to Irish people, and then you get into government and you promise all sorts of things. I don't want to keep personally on at anybody like Enda Kenny. I genuinely think he's probably a good guy. You know, I genuinely think before he got into power, he probably thought that he had maybe some answers or could stop paying or something like that. I think then when he got in, he was told who really runs the country, and the Holy Trinity or the Troika or whatever you like to call them. They come and they say how it's going to be. And somebody said to me before, but sure, if we don't pay them back for illegal gambling now, because you've seen how it's illegal, you know, there's laws broken. And if we don't pay them back, then they won't put money in our bank machines. And I go, well, let's print our own money. Because that's all they're doing. They're a private corporation printing paper for huge, huge profits. And that's all it is. And you would put the fear of God into the Europeans if you actually told them that you know what it is. It's worthless money. It doesn't say on the euro anymore, promise to pay the bearer off, because it's worthless. It doesn't say, what did he used to say, legal tender or something like that. There's none of these markings on euros anymore. They can't print, it's getting devalued. Claire Leonard will talk later on how quickly the euro is devalued. We think the prices of stuff are going up. It's quite shocking to see the price of stuff is really not going up at all. It's the value of the euro is shooting down as well as the dollar. So then, when we got into this trouble then and Fianna Fáil were in power, I don't know if there's too much fluoride in the water or something here, but our memory is not good about promises made by the government. And people say to me, well then, you know, why are you only starting now talking about it? Well, the truth about it is, I mean, I was a struggling electrician trying to pay my bills. And I'm a working man, I don't smoke or drink. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I just don't. I'm a family man. And I would work every hour God sent to try and provide for my family. And I find it very, very difficult. So I'm saying to myself, a lot of people must find it difficult then. And the trouble with Irish people is, because we're a proud people who want to pay our way, there's a certain shame attached. And most people don't come out and say it. And that's why we're up to, I think, nearly 4 suicides a day now in this country, because people just do it. Again, I won't mention names, but I met a young man, 18 years of age, who came to me, and he said, can I help them? Receivers moved in on a farm that they had. And I said, yeah, we'll go and talk to the bank, because I have ways of finding out information, because I went public, a lot of people came to me. It's not that I'm a genius, I didn't figure this out. A lot of people just come and say, well, you know this, or you know this. And when you check it out, you find really extraordinary stuff. The idea of them selling the mortgages and not owning the mortgages and still going to court and telling the judge they own the mortgage was abhorrent to me. I thought, like, let's go to court if you want. We'll both tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. And that's not how court works. Commercial courts have nothing to do with justice. The commercial courts may as well have the Bank of Ireland emblem over them. And that's the truth. And if you ever go to court, you'll see it. And my problem also with justice from commercial courts is that if I'm driving up the road here in Mayo and I have a boot full of cocaine, apart from having a good night out, if I get stopped by the guards, I will get arrested. And the state will afford me whatever legal representation I desire. and if I don't like the legal team I get, I can choose another one. Now, I met a man from Monaghan who came down, and he was so nervous that he didn't go to court, and they found it in favour. They just gave a default judgment. Because when I shook hands with him, you know these men that just real hard little hands from working hard, and he was so ashamed that he couldn't go into court. And he has a judgment order against him now for repossession. And I said to him, did you not even show up in court? And he said, I wouldn't be able to stand up in court or say anything, because when you go in there, if you've never been into the High Court, it's like, not that have been to many Freemason lodges or anything, but it's a bit like that. It's a very peculiar place. There's men in there with wigs and gowns, and they speak a funny language. It is sort of in English, but it's a different dialect than I understand. And I've seen it several times before that the man just stands there and the judge is shouting at him, but you got the money, you have to pay it back. And you know, we all assume that that's probably a correct statement until you see what was going on in the background that the judges don't even want to listen to. So the man then has a default judgment. His taxes, by the way, his taxes are bailing out the bankers that we're talking about. You know, he worked all his life, so his taxes are bailing these criminals out. His taxes are also paying for the free legal aid that's going to criminals. But when he's there about to lose his family home in Ireland, so now you go into that arena and do it yourself. Now he did approach a barrister, and the barrister said to him, if you can give me €25,000, I'll go and defend you. Right? And he said, if I had €25,000, I'd pay my mortgage for the next 2.5 years and then see where the chips fall down. But that's justice in Ireland. That's what's happening, and we really need to wake up. And I hate when I hear people on radio saying, oh, but these people, you know, they got the money, they signed a contract, so they have to pay it back. Look at it, if it was that simple, of course, we all agree with that. There'd be no argument with that. But in that very simple statement, I say to people, well, what contract did you sign? Did you ever see a contract from the bank? When you went to get your mortgage and you went in to sign the so-called contract, do you ever remember seeing a document called contract? There isn't one. And I don't know why there isn't. Myself and Johnny were talking about this evening. We're unsure why there is no contract, but there isn't one. Now, most people, I don't know how much people know about contract law. In this country, mostly in contract, an offer and an acceptance is okay. That makes a contract. So if I offer you a bar of chocolate and I say to you, the offer of the bar of chocolate is €1, and you say to me, I accept that, that's a contract. So you go into a shop and you see a newspaper for €1, that's on offer. You take, that's the acceptance, and you go to the till and you pay it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But contract law in this country says that for property or land, you must have a written contract signed by both parties. So it must be signed by both parties and binding. And all the people I help, when we do a data request, in other words, you request all your data from the bank. This is the first step that we do for people who find themselves in difficulty. And isn't it amazing, out of the hundreds of people where we requested data, we have never seen a contract from the bank. And then when you think about it, if I'm buying a car off someone, normally the two parties are there and we sign the document, and that's how it works. But when I went to get my mortgage, I went into a solicitor, and he was the same solicitor for the bank. There's only one solicitor. And there's nobody else signing, only me. And all I'm signing is an acceptance. Now, we don't know why that is, but I think it has something to do with the selling of the mortgages on then and stuff like that. I can't be sure. Go to court, you know, the judge says things like, oh, but you got the money and you signed the contract. And we go, well, that's fair enough, Your Honour. Can we just have a look at the contract that we signed? And then there's a big kerfuffle in the courtroom. And they go, well, we can't find it. It's always we can't find it. And I said, well, I found several things. I found my mortgage trading on the stock exchange, Your Honour. What do you think of that? And I said, well, I found several things. I found my mortgage trading on the stock exchange, Your Honour. What do you think of that? And he goes, well, an offer and acceptance is good enough. So I said, okay, Your Honour, so you're now wiping out contract law in Ireland. An offer and acceptance is good enough now. Because once you remember where you are, the commercial courts are the bank's courts, and they can make up the law and change it as they wish. And I talked about the law that Jonathan Sugarman was talking about early on, 5 years imprisonment. Well, the financial regulator, it was his job to check, was this all done on a book board, and it was to stop us getting into this mess. And while I think he should have been arrested and put in prison for treason, somehow we were tricked into giving him 600,000 euros for the job well done and send him off to the Bahamas. And while I don't think the new guy, Matthew Elderfield, is a particularly bad guy, he was the regulator in England when Northern Rock went to the wall. And when he came here, he brought out a new law. So we have one in 2006, which was before the crash, that puts most bankers in jail for 5 years. And because he couldn't allow that happen, he brought out a new document, 2009. I have both documents, I have the originals that we bring to court. The 2009 document is a mirror image of the 2006 document. They're almost exactly the same, except for when you go through down through the headings. There's just one thing missing from the 2009, and that's an implementation date. How strange is that they bring out a law with no implementation date? And that's again treating the Irish people as ticks. Like, just show them a law and tell them, oh, 5 years in prison, yeah, but that's 2009. And in this it talks about the previous law back in the 1970s. It doesn't mention the 2006 law. And, you know, these are the huge problems that I have with the con that's being played on us all. Like, I'm only into fairness and justice, and that's it. I'm not against banks, but I'm certainly against people being pulled out of their house when they're being conned. That I don't know, because, like, as I say, I don't claim to be an expert on anything. These are just stuff that I have found out over the last year and a half by checking, and I'm in the courts the whole time. But in general, the courts, the commercial courts, they can make it up as they go along. I mean, I've seen them saying, well, they sold it, so what? You still have to pay them. And I'm thinking, well, you're telling me if somebody already got paid for something, they come back into court and still demand the money again. I could have made a lot of money. Yeah. No, it's not that the Irish... Oh, yeah, no, I'm not saying Irish people are thick. They treat us like we're thick. That's what I find offensive. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right, you would think, wouldn't you? I mean, and that's what I'm fighting for, is to try to get a little bit of justice. So I'll play a little bit here because, as I say, our memories aren't great. Because when they started bailing out these banks, the reason, and I went a bit off the track, the reason that people say, well, why didn't any of us do anything till now, is because if you remember at the time, the Fianna Fáil government was like the sick man in Ireland. We all knew they were dying, and it was just a matter of time. So Fine Gael and Labour were like this dog chomping on a bit to get into government because of the crazy things Fianna Fáil were doing about paying back bondholders. So I'll give you just a little memory of it if you can. There we go.
All I can say to the Irish people, who some of whom may be watching tonight, is that if things go our way, there will be a new government in 6 weeks' time, and the banks aren't getting another cent. Anglo-Irish Bank is not getting another cent of our money. And any bank coming to us looking for more money is going to have to show how they're going to impose losses on their junior bondholders, on their senior bondholders, and their other creditors before they come looking to us for any more money, not another cent.
Right. See, it's important to do that because maybe it's my age, or maybe it is the fluoride in the water, but I need to kind of play that again because that's like, oh yeah, I remember that now. And I think that's what they rely on, you know, because after a while I think we do forget promises made. And I know people say, oh, politicians lie the whole time, and, you know, that's fine. And maybe, you know, should we accept that? And if we do, maybe that's our fault. Maybe, like, I haven't voted since my early 20s, and there's a real good reason for it. It's because of this bullshit, you know, and everybody says, no, politicians always lie. Well, should we accept that? And if they were lying and it was just about a bus run for a school kid somewhere and they couldn't promise and deliver it, okay, fair enough. But I think this is the biggest disaster to hit our country since the formation of the state. And it's the most taxing debt ever put on us since the formation of the state. And if you think the few evictions you see now, you want to see what's coming down the road. And also, we had a mathematician in America who advised the Reagan administration. He's helping us with the court case in some of the areas that we're bringing against the government. And he has worked out that we will default. We will default. Make no bones about it. And because I go around saying it, you will hear them now starting to say it on radio and TV. Mark my words, we will default again, and we will need another bailout. Now, I'm not claiming to be a big businessman or anything like that. I only run a small business and it's really on its knees, so maybe I'm not so good at doing business. But if you ran the country as a business and you're in trouble, and you go to the bank manager and say, I can't pay back my loan, how about giving me another loan to pay back that loan? I mean, in business terms, I mean, most people who have small businesses they know that, look, that's ridiculous. Why do we do that as a country then, if you know the country really should be run as a business, right? I mean, it would be crazy to keep going back to the bank and say, look, I'm fucked, I can't pay that. It gives you another loan, bigger one. It's crazy, we're just allowing this to go on, but we're top of the class. We got the gold star from Enda, and we're top of the class.
Tomorrow, one of the world's most spectacularly bust banks will repay in full a bond worth $1 billion. This is an unsecured bond. It is covered by no government guarantee. It was issued by the Anglo-Irish Bank of Sean Fitzpatrick to finance the unsustainable loans to property developers that would cripple the nation. Now, the corpse of Anglo renamed the IBRC as having to pay its debts from beyond the grave with our money.
If the Anglo bondholders are paid, they'll be paid from their own resources. It's not going to come from the taxpayer.
What's happening in relation to the Anglo bondholders is they'll be paid from Anglo's own resources. Anglo has none of its own resources, does it?
No. It has its current assets and liabilities. We rely for funding entirely on public authorities.
Of all the aspects of this crisis that seem grossly unfair, few have caught the public imagination in the way that paying the debts of Anglo-Irish Bank has. That the multi-billion euro debts of Sean Fitzpatrick's Anglo should be laid at the door of the taxpayer simply seems profoundly wrong.
The principles of democracy have been violated because the people of Ireland have been forced to repay those bonds without being asked to consent to them. The government is refusing to carry out the referendum, is refusing to put to direct vote of the people that decision. And as a result of that, this is undemocratic decision.
The Anglo bondholders are paid, they'll be paid from their own resources.
Anglo has none of its own resources, does it?
No.
The government failed to guarantee a burden sharing arrangement for non-guaranteed bank debt as part of the bailout arrangements. Ireland's commitments on sovereign debt must be honoured in full. Ireland's commitments on debt under guarantee must be honoured in full. What legal or moral compulsion is on Ireland, however, to honour in full debt incurred by Irish banks when there was no state involvement in the arrangements. These loans were entered into freely by willing lenders and willing borrowers with absolutely no state participation. The interest rate charged represented the risk at the time, and there never was a state liability. It is obscene that liability for these loans is now being transferred to the Irish taxpayer and in many respects to the poorest of the Irish taxpayers. There is 10 billion of subordinated debt in the Irish banks. There is 15 billion of non-guaranteed senior debt. The Irish government and the Irish taxpayer has no liability whatsoever for these debts. But the bailout deal is now forcing them to accept liability because the bailout deal puts this imposition on them. So the Minister, in his budget, reduces social welfare payments. He punishes the blind, the disabled, the widows, the carers, the unemployed. He taxes the poorest at work. And for what? so that the taxpayers can take on the liability for debts that the country never incurred and that arose from private arrangements between private institutions. What a disaster, what an obscenity. How can the government stand over it? How can our European colleagues stand over it? When the deal was agreed, there was an attempt to justify it, because any renegotiation of bank debt in Ireland could have a major adverse effects on those banks in Germany, France and the UK that had lent to the Irish banks. This consideration may have been valid some time ago, but it is no longer valid. The latest available bank data has shown that Irish guaranteed bank debt has been sold on at a discount to hedge funds in the USA and the UK and Luxembourg, as well as to smaller speculative investors. If you're interested in the data, Minister, you'll find it through Clearstream and Euroclear. And you can track the sales of bonds at discounts right across. And they're no longer being held by the European banks that lent in the first instance. They're in the possession of hedge funds now, and you can find their names on those two sites. If 25%, if for example a hedge fund buys Irish unguaranteed bank debt at 80 cents in the euro, it stands to make 25% on its investment if Ireland continues to redeem the debt at par. The position has now become indefensible that the Irish taxpayer, even the poorest taxpayers, should be required to underpin the speculation of hedge fund investors. There must be burden sharing of bank debt, transparent, open, negotiated burden sharing. It must deal with both subordinate debt and non-guaranteed senior debt. And if you want to find the origin of the phrase burden sharing, it was Jean-Paul Trichet himself that used it in the first instance as chairman of the Paris Club, which was the first international institution involved in the discounting of debt. Right. If the EU finds this approach unacceptable for fear of a knock-on effect in Europe, and if the Irish taxpayer is expected to underpin the banking system in other member states, then where is the quid pro quo? Where was the quid pro quo in the negotiation? The Icelandic government has negotiated 15-year money at 3.2% from the UK and Dutch governments for their bank bailout. Ireland is being charged 5.8%, and at least one tranche of EU funding has a built-in profit margin of 2.9%. This is not solidarity. This is not in accordance with the spirit of Article 122 of the treaty. The government's negotiation has led to a very bad result and a very bad deal. The deal needs to be renegotiated, Minister, and Fine Gael in the election will look for a mandate to do so.
Thank you very much, Deputy Noonan.
So you can see no one seems to know what's going on, and this worries me because, like, I'm not the electrician, I don't know what's going on either. But I know one thing for sure, that they don't know what's going on. And as a small business guy, I know that you can't keep going back to a bank when you can't pay the first loan, looking for a second loan and another loan. That to me is crazy. And what they're doing then is selling all our natural resources. You know, they're selling everything. It's like wholesale, sell everything. This is the only plan we have, is like, you know, if I'm in a small business and I need my van for work, I said, well, I have to pay the bank, so I'll sell the van. And then I'll try to pay the rest of the loan. And then I have a bag of tools here, so I'll sell that. And I'm selling everything that actually makes money for us. To me, it's just ridiculous. I'm not saying I have the answers, but there's a few things we can try. Now, I don't know if anybody wants to know anything about receivers or anything like that. Does that interest anybody? No? No, okay, I won't talk about receivers. Just to say that we always sack a receiver when we get one on our property somewhere. Okay, so I'm just going to just talk for a little bit about direct democracy, and Ray will talk about that then, I think, at the end. Oh, you're going after me, aren't you? Yeah. So, direct democracy, before anybody starts going, not a political party, please. Direct democracy is something that I firmly believe in. And Ray will speak about why, and then you'll understand. But basically, it's democracy that you've never seen before. Because I'm old enough to know that I've never seen it before either. But democracy basically is real democracy. Democracy in this country, as we think it exists, is a guy knocks on your door every 4 or 5 years and says, can I have the vote? You say, well, what are you offering? What are you promising? He goes, well, we won't pay back the bondholders. And we won't do this and we won't do that. And then they get into government and they do it. And then what can we do as a country? Nothing. We have to give out in bars and pubs and as we stand on the street and give out about everything. And I've done all my marching and I've done all my giving out, and it seems like nobody's listening. And it's frustrating. Nobody's listening. So myself and John Squire is here. I'm just an electrician. He's just a plasterer. We decided to take a court case against the government. And when I went into the High Court, now we fund this, by the way, just from donations from people. And a lot of the donations even come from America. I don't know if you watch some of the YouTube videos that we put up where we actually serve the papers. You should read through some of the comments, although some of them are negative because they don't understand. Like a lot of people say to me, oh, you've got your loan, pay it back. That's contract law. You know, I can't keep answering everybody, so I just try to explain, look, I know what's going on. So I understand when people say, well, I'm not paying his mortgage. See, this is what a lot of people say, I'm not paying his mortgage. See, you don't have to pay his mortgage. You should, everything should be on an individual basis. See what a guy can really afford, because you do have to separate the won't pay from can't pay, you know. So everything should be on an individual basis. But the truth about the matter is that if a guy gets evicted, then we are paying his mortgage. Because when he gets evicted, he becomes socially housed. And then we all pay his mortgage. And that's the fact. I think the bank should take up the loss on anybody's mortgage where they cannot afford it. I mean, I had a woman come to me and she was so distraught about, she was still paying her mortgage, but only because she had 2 packets of sausages in the fridge that week, that's what she fed her kids on. I mean, that's, you know, when you see what they did, and you see the proud Irish people, the extremities they go to pay their mortgage, really appalls me, because they fed on our honesty for it. And that's what really, really bothers me, you know. So, so direct democracy then gives power back to you. That's really what it does. And Ray will talk in detail a good bit about it, but I'll just give you the cartoon version of it. That if we had direct democracy, what it does, and we used to have it in our first constitution, by the way, they took it out. See, when we were asleep or drinking that fluoridated water or something, they took it out and nobody noticed. It went missing on us. And direct democracy basically is, if you gathered, I think it was 75,000 votes, am I right in saying that? 75,000 votes. Now I could get 75,000 votes over a weekend, because I would set up a table in Galway, say Limerick, Dublin, Cork, wherever, and get 75,000 votes. And all I would have to put on it is, do you think we should pay bondholders or foreign gamblers with our sovereign money of this country? Do you think we should sell off our fishing rights and national assets to pay back these gamblers? I mean, I say no, I don't know, but I think I would get 75,000 votes. And then I think that once I got to 75,000 votes, that allows me to call a referendum. Now, I don't know, but I think if a referendum was called when they decided to do this crazy thing about paying these gamblers, I'm not sure that would have been passed. I think I would have won that. So if this government are in power to serve us, why are they ignoring the want of the people? Or if they're unsure, why don't you just call a referendum and then say, well, the people decided, Ben, and you're wrong. Then I'll accept that. I'll accept that. But we do not have democracy. What we have is a government who goes into power and works for foreign corporate banks and gangsters and fraudsters, and they work for them, and they will do their utmost to keep us in the dark, or to shut us up, or to keep us off RTE, as they always do with me, or just whatever it is they can do. And then 5 years later, they'll come back and ask for your vote again. And that's why I haven't voted. And I know people say, as an Irishman, you know, a vote's an important thing, and blah, 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 blah. I agree with all that. But I'm not going to be part of the con. So with direct democracy, if we had left that in our constitution, what it leads to is better government and governing of our finances and stuff like that. Because what it does is that if we, say I was in the Fianna Fáil government and we got Fianna Fáil out, well of course they would have never paid back the bondholders in the first place, okay, because it was direct democracy. But say when we went in and we were Fine Gael, and I said, what do you think, will we continue paying back these bondholders? Well, someone at the table is going to say, well, you better not, because they're just going to call a referendum, and then that's not going to be passed. So now I have to think of a better way. I actually now have to do the work I'm paid for, instead of the Troika telling me what to do. Because I can even say to the Troika, look, I can tell you, yeah, no problem, we'll pay you back, but when the people have to say, they're going to tell you where to go. And they're going to tell you in no uncertain terms. So that's what direct democracy does. It's like a police force of the government, and you can't do crazy stuff. But as I say, Ray will come up now, and he will give you a more insight into how it works so perfectly. Thanks for your attention. We will hang around afterwards to take questions and stuff like that. Democracy Ireland.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Raymond Whitehead, and I'm from Dublin. I set up an organisation 3 years ago called Direct Democracy Ireland, and it came out of, like Ben, I'd say all people here, a sense of anger and frustration at what was happening in this country, and the sense of hopelessness and helplessness that I felt, that I had no say in my own country's future. And I had lived in Switzerland for 4 years as a student, almost 40 years ago now. And it left a lasting impression on me. Switzerland is what is called a direct democracy. And I knew nothing about politics then, and knew just as much about politics up to a couple of years ago, until I woke up and started asking questions about what I could do to try and change things, because I just felt I can't stand back and do nothing. And I'm not anybody, I'm not a known person, I'm unemployed at the moment. But I just couldn't stand by and do nothing. And I saw what the power the people of Switzerland have, the average person in Switzerland has, when I was there. And it left this lasting impression on me. And the sense I had, and I was in my early 20s, when I went there, and it was palpable, was when you walk down the street in a village or a town in Switzerland, you have this sense that the people, the ordinary people of that street who were walking down the street, they owned that street. That was their street. And they had a sense of ownership of their town, of their village, because they had a direct say in everything that happened. Anyone in that town could call a referendum locally to change something. And if enough people agreed with them, that became law, and that's what the local politicians had to do in order to effect whatever change the people decided. So the politicians, locally and nationally, were servants of the people at the end of the day. Now, they do have a representative democracy like we have, where they elect politicians to do a job. But in the same way that you might elect somebody to do a job in your house, you don't just let him get on with it and do whatever he wants for the next, until the job is finished. If he's doing something you don't like, you can hire him, you can fire him, or you can tell him what you want. I don't want it done this way, I want it done that way. You're paying the bills, you're the people who are paying his wages, and we're the people who are paying the wages of the politicians. We deserve to have a say. If we can hire them, we can fire them. We should be able to. In Switzerland, they have that. It's called direct democracy. They've had it for 150 years. And it works very well, thank you very much. Now, a friend of mine, I was talking to him about it the other day, and he gave me an example of his experience in Switzerland, and it just highlighted exactly what I was saying about the average person. This is 35 years ago. He said he happened to be in Switzerland on a visit, and he was waiting for a friend in a small town, small village. And he was sitting in his car with the engine running, waiting for his friend. And a woman who was passing by just knocked on the window and said to him, "Would you mind turning off your engine? You're polluting the air in the street." Now, this is 35 years ago, long before the Green Party or eco this or eco that. There was that sense of the quality of life that these people had and enjoyed in Switzerland. And anyone who goes to Switzerland will realise that you can practically eat your dinner off any street in Switzerland. It is spotless, everything works, everything goes on time, their economy is a strong economy, and they are a rich country. Now, this is one of the objections that people often put up against direct democracy. They say, oh, the Swiss are rich, they can afford to have referendums every month or every whatever. They have about 10 referendums a year. They can afford that. But actually they're not rich. They don't have direct democracy because they're rich. They are rich because they have direct democracy. Because the people have a direct say in everything that happens in their community and in their country. And I'm quite sure that there are lots of people here who know where the massive wastes are in their communities, where money is being abused and flushed down the toilet. And we've seen it here, Ben has outlined it, where regulations have been abused, money has been flushed down, 5 billion a day according to that chap, in his institution alone. So where people are engaged and involved in their own communities and have a sense of ownership, that waste doesn't happen. I remember seeing last year headlines in the national newspaper. I'm sure some people probably will remember it. There were a couple of headlines, one after the other. One was 1,400 euros to change a light bulb in a Garda station. Headlines. Another headline was 16,000 euro to put, I think it was a shower in a council office or something. These are the kind of massive wastes. These are just small examples of local wastes of money that can be multiplied by 1 million when it comes to what happens at governmental level. And as Ben said, we stand by and look at this helplessly. We have no say. Now, in Switzerland, people can, as we could under our first constitution in 1922, get 100,000 signatures in Switzerland to call a national referendum on anything. And in 1922, the founding fathers of the Irish Free State gave the people of Ireland the power of referendum to guard against the very abuses of power that we've seen decade after decade after decade in this country. It's become endemic at this point. Now, the founding fathers of the Irish Free State were intelligent men. If we had kept that power of referendum, we would not be the product and the victims of these abuses that we see today. We could step in and say, no, we're not paying bond holders. In fact, we would never be in that position in the first place. It would probably never have arisen. We'd have a country like Switzerland where everything works and everything is geared towards quality of life for the people of that country and not towards the quality of life of an elite group of people. Now, Switzerland, Ireland, an example of the efficiencies that the Swiss enjoy because of direct democracy are that Ireland has in the EU the highest level of money paid for services in the EU. 60% of our GDP goes on services. And what have we got to show for it? And we all know the outcome of it. We have a health system that's not fit for purpose, people lying on trolleys, dying on trolleys. And I've been down there with members of my own family as well. We have crime levels that are on the increase. We have so many problems in this country, many of which could be solved if we as citizens had that sense of empowerment and ability to bring about change in our own communities and in our own lives, and nationally and locally. 60% of our GDP goes on services, and we've 40% left over to spend on whatever else, which is not much. The lowest spend in Europe, and they're not in Europe, and they're not in the euro, on services. And they also have probably the best services in Europe is Switzerland. And they spend 36% is all of their GDP that goes on services. They have the best services in Europe. As I said, you can go there, you can eat your dinner off the street practically. Everything works. And it is efficient because the local people of that country know where the waste is. They know where money is spent and how it should be spent locally and nationally. And they take an interest in these things. They gem themselves up on it because they are empowered, because they have that power. What do? We shrug our shoulders. What can we do? Nothing we can do. We don't have a say. So we become apathetic, and we have been apathetic, and we all know it's the one thing that is said internationally about us. Why are the Irish so quiet? We're apathetic. We don't have a say. You just give up after a while. I remember Wood Quay. I don't know how many people here would remember Wood Quay. 150,000 people marched through the street against what the government were doing in Wood Quay. 250,000 people signed a petition against the government pouring concrete over that site. The EU wrote to them and said this is a site of international importance. The Danes wrote to them and said this is part of our history, please don't do this. People chained themselves, a priest and some notaries chained themselves to bulldozers and heavy machinery. And what did our government do? Ignored everybody and just poured concrete over the site. What does that do to your psyche? What does that do when it happens year after year, day after day? It makes you apathetic and you just give up. Now I go back to the first constitution, 1922. The founding fathers gave the Irish people this power of referendum. And what did the cute hers do? The first government that got in, they were a Fine Gael government. They took it away from the people. Now this was enshrined in the Constitution. The Founding Fathers enshrined this in our Constitution in 1922. The people have the right, if they get 70,000 votes or 75,000 votes, you can call a referendum. Not votes, signatures. You can call a referendum. Now under the Constitution, the government, if they took something out of the Constitution or changed the Constitution in any way, just like today, they had to put it to a referendum to the people within 2 years. Now, Article 50 of the Constitution allowed them to make amendments to the Constitution. Not changes, but amendments. So, the clever people, the government of the day, they amended the 2-year period that they had to put this to the people, that they could take away their voice, their power of referendum. From 2 years, they extended the period from 2 years to 8 years. And they said, we're not taking away your right to have a referendum, we're just putting it off by a few years. At the end of that 8 years, what did they do? They extended it by another 8 years. And then the second constitution came about. We gained a freedom. The second constitution was drawn up. And buried in that constitution was the government retaining the right of referendum. Now the government never had the right of referendum to retain in the first place because we were denied our right to have a referendum on it under the first constitution. So we was robbed, as they say. They stole our voice, and at the time they took it away, 100,000 signatures, just short of 100,000 signatures, was got against what they were doing. And the people were ignored. They said, no, you can have your referendum, but we're putting it off for within the next 8 years. We call it when it suits us. And that's what they've done ever since. They suited themselves. So much so that they will change the law in order to suit themselves. We have these charges coming in, these property charges coming in, and we think we live in a democracy, and we've just been told by the government we virtually had a referendum because the majority of people don't want this. Even the people who paid have done so under duress, most of them. So Noonan said, if we can't get your details, we will criminalise you. These are our elected representatives. The people that we put in power are turned around and told us, if we don't do what we're told, we will criminalise you. I don't believe this is democracy. So I set up this group 3 years ago to take back, to get into power, to become a political party that goes into power with one objective, one main objective, and that is to give the power of referendum back to the people of Ireland by calling a referendum on that and asking the people, do you want a voice back? Do you want institutions set up, mechanisms set up that will allow you to have a say in your own country, just like the Swiss? And I believe the majority of people would say yes. Most places I go, almost 100% of people, I would say, if not 100%, say, I would like a piece of that. So, this is direct democracy, and if anyone has any questions later about it, I've given you the Reader's Digest version again because we don't have a lot of time. It's a large subject. It can get rather complicated, but it is basically a simple matter of taking back that power. And if people would like to take that power back, please join our group. We have registration forms here that you can fill in tonight and become a member. And we're ready to become a political party now. We have the numbers required to register as a political party. But the more people who sign up for this, the better. Switzerland was never invaded during the Second World War. It has an 800-year history of independence. Now, just to cover that, because it's an interesting question, the Swiss people are very proud, like the Irish, and very independent. And during the Second World War, people think that Switzerland was always rich. It wasn't always rich. It's a bit like the Afghanistan of Europe. It's covered in Alps, in mountains. And it's a hard place to make a living out of big chunks of rock. A few cuckoo clocks, some cheese, chocolate, things like that. But they became the banking centre of the world almost. Certainly play a large role in that area. When, during the Second World War, Hitler, there is a natural valley almost that runs through Switzerland that you could run an army through. And he wanted to use Switzerland as a shortcut to the other countries when he was invading them. And it was a very nice little shortcut. And the Swiss people said, no, you're not coming into our country. He said, look, you can keep your neutrality. I won't invade you. I just want to use you for a shortcut to the other countries. And they said, no, get stuffed. And they said, well, if you don't, Switzerland, by the way, is half the size of Ireland, with twice the population, almost. And they said, no, you're not coming in here. He said, if you don't let me through, I'll invade you. I'm taking over the world, and who are you to stand in my way? And they said, no, do your worst. So a very famous general there took every man over the age of 15 out of the towns and villages and up into the mountains. And he sent a message to Hitler. He said, there are only old men, women and children in the cities, towns and villages. Come in and do your worst. And Hitler took one look and realised it was like Afghanistan. He knew he couldn't do it. A handful of men can destroy an army from the Alps, especially in those days. So he decided to make them his bank. So he put all his loot there. And the Swiss were poor. This guy's taken over the world. They thought, well, we better do business with him. You know, even if we can't invade us, we're going to be a little bit isolated. So he had them in that sense. So he used them as a natural bank. And then the rest of the world looked on and thought, God, this place, if Hitler can't take it over, and he's right on their doorstep, that's a very safe place to put your money. So they became recognised as one of the safest places. And the Swiss have remained independent ever since. They didn't join the EU, because the EU wanted to do something like what Hitler did. They wanted to run a major highway down the length of Switzerland, as a shortcut to everywhere else for traffic to go up and down. They said, you're not polluting our country. We have a nice clean country and the price isn't worth it. And they're not in the euro either. They have their own currency. And they still do very nice. Thank you very much. So I believe the road we have to go is the road that our founding fathers took for us in the first place and envisioned for us, where everybody is equal in this country and everybody has the possibility of bringing about change in their community and in their nation. And this is the fairest way. And not to have our so-called elected representative criminalising us and dictating to us like we're idiots. And changing the rules. As Noonan said, if I can't get your details, I'll change the law. It's against the law for them to bypass the, what's called the data protection. He said, we changed the law. So they changed the law to suit themselves when it suits them. And we're treated like slaves or serfs of some sort. They're supposed to be working for us, not the other way around. And it's time that we grew up as a nation and took back that power that was given to us in 1922 by the founding fathers of this state. So thank you very much, and I hope you'll sign up.